Okay, so we're good. So maybe we can start the class. We are going to be entering into the 4 weeks of more technical arguments. So you have to brace for impact because it might be a little more not difficult, but it might require a lot more thinking, maybe, than what we used to in that way. And then what I mean by thinking, I mean intentionally thinking. Like I have to pay attention. So that's a big part. All right. So thank you for our time together tonight. We ask that you would be with us, give us clarity, understanding, and that we just actually may learn those arguments so they can be useful when we encounter people with questions about your existence. And we pray in your name. Amen. All right, first thing, so last week we didn't have any class because of the Easter play, and the week before I was not here, but thanks to Jesse, stepped in. You had a document. I read your papers. The goal was not to grade them. The goal was for you to work on that, and together and just get the answers. So you know how vast in one way apologetics is a lot more than arguing for the existence of God. There is a lot of questions out there, and the goal of what we do really in apologetics is trying to find a way to give some answers that would make sense to people. Last semester, I need to go back a little bit, but the first part of the class is laying down the biblical foundation for a correct approach of how do we use apologetics, and don't get confused by replacing what we should do, which is evangelism, and replacing it just with a bunch of arguments without really taking the time to do what we're supposed to, which is sharing the gospel in that way, right? So now we are entering in this last phase. So we'll have 4 classes tonight and 3 more weeks. And then the last week before the final would be like a big review, right? We'll go through a lot of things we said, and don't worry about it. Your exam will be something you can do. Okay, so no freaking out. Yes, just as a housekeeping reminder, so we have 2 assignments coming up. One is for in 2 weeks from now, the other one's a week after. So you have 1 paragraph due, and then the essay number 2 on chapter 8. I think, is it chapter 8? Yes, I think it is. You have all the necessary documents in college office. You can have access to that. So that would be this. And all right, so you have your syllabus with you. Take it. I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing because I think it would be helpful. So this class, as always, will be in 2 parts. The first part will be discussing the cosmological argument, and the second part will be discussing the teleological argument. 2 very different arguments, but they complete each other in that way. So that is going to be what we're going to be doing, right? So we have, if you look at the syllabus class tonight and next week, you have 4 different names for 4 different arguments. You see them on your syllabus, right? Cosmological, teleological, and then axiological, and then ontological arguments. So these are like kind of complicated terms. Maybe you've never heard of them before. So just to summarize what they are, it's very simple. The cosmological argument take a very simple idea of the existence of the universe as is, right? We have the existence we hear, and then asking the question, where does the universe come from? Where does it come from? It's a very simple question. And when you argue in that way, you are arguing for what we call a cause for the universe. Because obviously we hear, and before we were here, before the universe was here, we know the universe was not here, right? We'll have a couple of videos, short videos tonight. There's 3 of them that we're going to go through, done by mostly William Lane Craig, who's a Christian philosopher, who explains those principles, and showing that since we know philosophically, but also scientifically, that the universe did begin then it raises the question, where does it come from? So that's one way of arguing for the existence of God. The second argument, which builds on the first one, it's the teleological, not theological argument. You'll see you see the difference when right? It doesn't say theology, but you have the word teleo in there. And the teleological argument comes from the Greek word teleo, which means order, design. So we look at the universe and realize the universe is quite complex. Remember we saw that video when we were discussing creation, evolution, the privileged planet. We use the expression fine-tuning. You remember that? So we look at the universe, things seems to be working pretty well. And how could something that complex works on its own? And the teleological argument builds on the universe by observing what it is and realizing, well, if there is a proof of design in this universe, that means it has to be that there is a designer behind it. And it comes from the 18th century philosopher whose name was William Palyed, and we'll discuss that later on, who said if you find a watch walking somewhere in the forest, your first impression will be that someone lost the watch, not that nature can do great things, right? Nobody finding a watch as you walk somewhere, nobody thinks it was done by accident. We always think something that has been designed will kind of stick out, and it's so if there is design in this world, which we believe there is, and then we discussed that a few weeks ago, then that means there have to be a designer, right? That's the second argument, building on the first one. And the two other arguments we'll be discussing next week are a tiny bit more complicated, but the axiological argument comes from the idea that since we have moral values, we have to ask the questions, where do they come from? Because without objective moral values, then any of our moral values will be the same. Meaning that your values are not better than mine, my values are not better than yours, and then when there is a conflict between you and who decides if there is no objective way of defining what is true and what is false, and how do we decide who's wrong? Who can actually look back in history and say that Adolf Hitler was a bad guy? His values are different than mine. But if I can make a judgment call on somebody else's values, because I do believe that my values are better than his, so either my values are objective, or I have to appeal to something else which is higher than me. Because who could say that my values are objective? They're mine. And for me to look back in history and say Genghis Khan was Pol Pot, Stalin or Adolf Hitler were bad people, I have to weigh this with something more objective than myself, right? So hence the question, who is capable of communicating or creating moral values that are objective if it's just us? Because if it's just us in this world, then someone will be maybe stronger than other people, more intelligent than other people, will impose his values on others, and that can be. So if there is such the thought of moral values, then it means that there has to be a moral lawgiver. That's the idea. Even if we don't agree on what they are, we do agree on the fact that we have moral values, right? So that's one. And the ontological arguments, I'm going to keep this for later, but basically it says, since to explain this world, we have to conceive the most perfect being as the origin of the universe, so he has to exist. God is necessary to explain the world in one way. The word ontological comes from, ontology is the concept of being. Right? Something that is ontologically real means something that does exist. I mean, don't worry, philosophers have a bad habit on giving us complicated words for simple things, but so that's what it is, right? So in front of you, hopefully you have two documents, right? One is a page of, with lines, empty lines, and for you to fill in, because we're going to do some group work at some point. And the other one is a 2-page presentation for that argues for the existence of God overall, right? So you have that, right? So, okay, so any questions so far? Do we know where we're going? So before we go into tonight's class, I want you to look at your syllabus one more time and realize that between this class and the next 3 classes, we are going to build a twofold argument. One is defensive and the other one is offensive, right? Once we answer on the question, how do we know that God exists? But these are the 4 arguments. And the other one is more offensive, and we're going to ask the atheist how he can explain or account for the world the way it is if there is no God, right? So that's very different. And they are 2 sides of the same coin, if you want to say. One is basically saying that, well, yes, God does exist because these are the arguments for his existence. And the other one is, if God does not exist, then you have to explain these several things. And one of them is, you look at this, there's 4 things we'll look at that. If, and that's April 15th and 22nd. Number 1, if God does not exist, then we are left with the philosophy that we call materialism, right? Anybody knows what materialism is as a philosophy? What does it say? I spoke about this a few times in class.
He who dies the most toys wins.
No, but thank you. That would be economical materialism. So what is the concept of materialism? Yes, there's nothing beyond matter and energy. There's no spiritual realm, there's no God, there's nothing. We're here by chance, by accident, by whatever you want, but there is no creator. There's nothing out there. There's no mind behind the universe. There's not even a spirit in our, or soul in our beings. We're just biological, chemical reactions, and that's the point. So if it's true, then the question we will ask is, how do we explain the complexity of humanity? If you and I are nothing but chemical reactions in our brains, for example, then how do we explain humanity if we're just beasts, right? We're nothing more than other species in the universe. Then how do we explain curiosity, beauty, aesthetics, interest in museums and building things, and this cannot be explained by the survival of our species, because we can survive without going to museums, can we? Yes, we can. So they are not necessary. None of what we do is necessary. Thinking about life is not necessary, right? Love is not necessary. Free will is not necessary. Having debates and thinking about things and before we make decisions, none of this is necessary. Look at every other species out there. There's millions of them, the life forms that we have on this planet, and none of them have the capacity to make those judgment call and aesthetics and extra. So we'll argue for that. The second one is there's no objective meaning and purpose. Like if you and I are there by accident, no one wanted us here. Not even our parents. Because our parents were, at this point, if evolution is true, they would be wired to be forced to having children so we can survive. So none of those relationships would mean anything and nobody wanted us here. So there's no meaning for life and there would be not even purpose. We'll discuss that. And the week after, we'll go a little deeper in discussing about objective ethical values. I said a few things about that. And then the last point we'll make before we close would be, okay, well, if my brain has not been designed to think, how do I know it's reliable? It's a very simple question. If you and I are consequences of random evolutions that gave us as a byproduct, as C.S. Lewis puts it, the brains we have so we can think, we wouldn't be able to trust it at all because we don't trust things that hasn't been designed. Like this thing has been designed to write on an iPad. I would never use this to make a phone call because it hasn't been designed to make a phone call. Now, if you see me trying to make a phone call with this, call 911, I'm having a stroke, right? So, but if I'm using this to make a phone call, you don't have to call 911. It has been designed this way. So it's the same with our brain. I know it's working, or I think it's working, but I cannot really believe or know any objective reasons why I believe my brain is reliable, unless I believe it has been designed to think. But if there is no God, there is no design behind evolution. Nothing is designed. Everything is a byproduct of random evolution through centuries and millions of years. So we have no reason to think that my thought process is actually meaningful in any way, right? So all these things, so you see between the 4 positive arguments for God's existence and the 4 challenges that we're presenting to our atheist friends, we are actually making a case, a big case, for God's existence, right? So that's what we're going to be doing in the next 3 weeks, plus this one. Any questions so far? Psh, no? All right, so Jeremy, we're ready for video number 1. It's fast. It's a lot of data, but really, I want to stop here and look at what we've said so far. Okay, so we have another maybe a few seconds, but the point here is this is the cosmological argument. Simply put, on the paper you have in front of you, if you look at you have page 1 and then part 2 in the back, and then you have the cosmological argument. I gave you a more expanded version of it. Okay, so we'll look at that later on. But what I want to look at here is, any of you took logic in school, maybe logic or university or school. Okay, so this is what you call a syllogism, right? It's very simple. You have in any argument, put this way, you have two premises, and then from those premises you infer or you conclude with a statement that if those two premises are true, then this must be true, right? So if blah, blah, and if blah, blah, therefore blah, blah, okay? So without the blah, blah, but you know what I'm saying, okay? So basically, we look at these things, these cosmological arguments, what do we know? Whatever begins to exist has a cause. This is really undisputed in a way. We haven't seen anything coming into life without any prior cause. We know that. We know that actually rather recently, because until Louis Pasteur in the 19th century proved that life couldn't spring out of nowhere, people believed that dead meat was the reason why we had flies. Because you know how flies, they lay their eggs in meats, and so the point is, and he made a very simple proof one day. He put some meat in closed containers, and they didn't produce any flies. So very simple, right? So, and until then, we thought that things could spring out of nowhere. Now we know for a fact that it's not the case. So whatever begins to exist has a cause. Not whatever. The point is not whatever exists, but whatever began to exist has a cause, right? So that's rather simple. In the first one, we know that from experience. Scientifically, philosophically, we'll discuss that in the second video, but that's what it is. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now, do we know anything that can start or that it does exist that doesn't have a cause? We don't, right? It's impossible for anything you look around you has a cause, right? We're drinking from a bottle because somebody put the bottle in the plastic bottle, etc. So we know that, right? So the first premise is one of those undisputed premises. The second one is the one we'll discuss in the second video, is the one that people have been trying to prove that, no, it's not the case. Right? The universe began to exist. That's the second premise. That is the most disputed of all the premises in this argument. Why? Because if the universe did begin, that means, number 3, the universe would have needed a cause, right? So the whole idea in atheism, in materialism, and using evolution is to actually argue that there is no need for a cause in the universe. We're just here. As you remember that quote from Bertrand Russell, the universe is here, and that's it. There's no reason. We don't have to argue where does it come from, why is it here. None of these questions matter in philosophy if you don't believe that there is a God. But this is the argument, right? So whatever began to exist has a cause. It's pretty simple. As a joke, they show you an egg, and where does the egg come from? The chicken, right? Very simple. Universe began to exist. That is the one thing, as I said, that people used to argue against. And most of the time, there you see all those alternate, causes, if you want to, alternate reason why they believe that the universe is not eternal. But the one argument they used earlier, and that's the one maybe we want to stop for a second on, is the famous second law of thermodynamics. You have to remember what it is. It's more complex than what they're saying here, but the simple idea is the energy is being used in the universe, and we know now that we are running out of usable energy. We're not running out of energy, we're running out of usable energy. That's the point. But if the universe was always there, and if we are running out of energy, by now, we wouldn't have any more energy left, right? Because I don't know if you guys drive cars? Yes. Do you have to refuel your tank? Yes. If we don't refuel your tank, what happens? Car stops. But if I tell you your car has always been there and nobody ever refueled your tank ever, would you believe me? You wouldn't, because your car uses the energy in the fuel. But the point is, for my car to never reach the point of being empty, that means, if my car was always here, that my tank is infinite, right? But we know that the universe is a closed environment, and by that we're determining that if the universe can run out of something, that means that it had a certain amount of that something at some point, right? If the universe can get to the end of the usable energy, that simply means that the universe cannot be eternal in that way. So in the second video later, we'll see that there is another reason why we believe the universe cannot be eternal. In a very simple exercise, think about if the universe has been here forever, how far back do we go in time? What would be the way to express how far back do we go in time if the universe has been here forever? What's the word for it? Infinity. Yeah, infinity, right? Now, if I were to tell you, okay, let's do an experiment. I give you an unlimited amount of time to go back in time from the beginning, go back in time in infinity, and then you come back. When would you be back? When? Never. Well, you would never come back because you can't come back from infinity. Now, if you cannot go back in time to infinity, then you cannot arrive to here, to infinity. It is impossible, right? That's the point that shows that the universe began to exist. If we reached to 2024, that means that we don't have an infinite amount of time since the beginning, because there wouldn't be any beginning, and if there was no beginning, we wouldn't be here today, right? So that's the point. So you want to finish the video? Jeremy, thank you. Words, and they're actually arguing in the video that for someone or something to be the cause of that universe, it has to be all this. Tell me why. Why do you think they're arguing for this? Why spaceless? Why timeless? Why immaterial? Yes?
Because the universe is all of the contrary things. It has space, time, material. It was causing it is not powerful, like infinitely powerful.
Yes. Okay, very good. What else can we say about this? All right, so the universe, right? It's right here. So before the universe existed, there was no time. There was no space. All these things didn't exist. That's the point, right? So, but then the one thing that is not there is, well, I can't use the iPad. I'll use it later. But whatever the cause would be, the cause would have to be outside the universe. Because if the as we see in philosophy, if the cause was contingent, dependent on the universe, that means that it was also created or arrived at the same time in the universe. And that cannot be the possibility, because whatever is in the universe couldn't cause itself if the universe was not there before. So, yes, those words are important, because when you look at those, they point to a being, right? Powerful, uncaused, immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. And there's a few other words that is not there. One of them is intelligent, that we will use later on to discuss the theological argument. All right? You want to finish the video? You always find that is, and I think it's consistent with what we believe with the Bible, is there is an element of faith in believing. Even if we argue for God's existence, we cannot really definitively prove his existence. That would be contrary to what the Bible requires for salvation, which is an element of faith. Now, faith is not irreasonable. You remember we read Hebrews 11:1 as a definition of faith. What do we have? Anybody can quote the verse? What is faith as it is defined in the Bible?
Things not seen,
Yes? It's simple. You can open your Bible and read it. It's not forbidden. You know the book that we
Substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
yes, okay? So, and then if you look at this definition that we have in Hebrews 11:1, none of the words that are used are actually, you could say, wishy-washy. They're very strong. Evidence of things unseen, so depending on the translation, you have the word demonstrations, evidence, and so having faith does not mean that we don't have reasons. It's just that the reasons we have still require something beyond our reason. That's the point. And you remember what we said about, we cannot substitute evangelism with apologetics. And the reason is because salvation comes through the work of the Holy Spirit, not through the work of arguments only. Arguments are there to help to remove the obstacles in the conversation. But the work of salvation comes from the Holy Spirit. It does not come from an intellectual change of mind. That intellectual change of minds happens when we help people process their questions, but we cannot replace the Holy Spirit in that way. So faith is required, and that's why when we present arguments for the existence of God, we are not arguing without any doubt. We're arguing quite reasonably. That was the word they used. Okay? Can we go to the second video, please? Is this. The point is, it's not that the math it's counterintuitive, but it actually is correct, right? the actual infinity or the number infinity cannot be materialized in this world. It is impossible. And they're showing here by these mathematicians who created that concept of a hotel. And then when you remove everybody from a hotel, or when you remove everybody from differently, then if you actual infinity minus actual infinity, you get two different numbers. One is you still have the actual infinity, and the other one is 3, which does not make any sense, right? So at the beginning, so this philosopher, 11th century, the point he said is two things. Number one, if the universe was eternal, that means that there was an infinite moment in the past that we cannot go back to, and we would never have reached here. But even in mathematics, the number of infinity does not work in reality, okay? We've seen that with the hotel, all right? Can we finish this? It's the simplest way of arguing for this. If to get to today, I don't know if you've seen those competitions where people plays all kinds of dominoes, and it's so anyway. So the reason why at some point they actually can put the last domino down, it's because there is a finite numbers of dominoes. If we were able to place an infinite number of dominoes in a place, then when you push down the first domino, you would never get to the end of the design. Never, right? Because there would be an infinite number of dominoes. So if there was an infinite numbers of past moments or events, then we would never have gotten to today because the dominoes would never have reached today. And the fact that we are here today shows that the universe cannot be eternal, right? I know it's a new concept. We'll come back to it in a moment. You want to continue? questions about this or comments so far? Can somebody rephrase what we've heard? If you were to use the arguments, how would you use it? Israel?
One point that I understand that
Yes.
if the past is infinite, that means the present wouldn't exist.
Yes. Okay. So he used the dominoes. Can somebody rephrase what was the argument with the dominoes? Like, how would you word it for yourself?
We couldn't reach the infinite.
Right, but I would like for someone to use the domino as an example. So because I think it's the most efficient way of expressing what we're trying to, because you know how obviously it's difficult to understand. So if we don't understand it, then we can't really explain it, right? So I want you to find a way to understand that and explain this with your own words.
I can try.
Okay, please.
All right, so if there was a beginning, then the dominoes, you couldn't have started in place to even stop being placed, because there was never a beginning, they're just there, and that's it. There's no
Right.
beginning.
If the universe was eternal.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Yeah, very good. I mean, that's the argument they use for the rooms. Like for the hotel to have infinite rooms, how long would it take for us to finish the rooms? Infinite. So could we use the hotel? We couldn't even use the hotel, right? So the universe, in that way, let's not go there for now. But so try to use the domino example in a sentence. How would you? Like, you're talking to me, and I'm an atheist. I'm telling you the universe did not have a beginning. So the universe is eternal. How would you argue with me? How would you try to express that to me? If you're telling me you're using the cosmological argument, then I want to understand it. But you're telling me the universe did have a beginning, and I'm telling you the universe was eternal. How would you argue?
Maybe you could say, have you ever seen a video of a pattern where you push one domino and they all fall down and
Yes.
turn into a design?
Mm-hmm.
So one of those dominoes has to be first
Mm-hmm.
in order to make that happen.
Yes.
But if you believe in infinity, it's always falling and there's no design
Yes.
and there's no end.
Yes.
So we would never arrive at whatever it was the pattern was.
Yes. Yes. And that means another way of saying it is if the last domino was supposed to be today's moments, and if we cannot reach to that domino, that means we will never have reached today. Okay? All right? So now look at your paper you have in front of you, and you look at the cosmological argument, which is part 2 of your document. I mean, thinking about, so you remember what we said about in this argument there are 2 premises and there is a conclusion, right? Premise number 1 is, what is the first premise on the video? Yes, whatever begins to exist has a cause. What's the second premise? Yes, the universe began to exist, and that is the most debated premise. Okay, so we spoke about this scientifically, and we spoke about this philosophically, so we know. So therefore,
the universe has a cause.
yes, the universe has a cause. Now, Daniel Bennett, I don't know if you heard of him, but Daniel Bennett is one of those 4 major neo-atheists that we've heard in the last 20 years. Richard Dawkins, Daniel Bennett, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens. And they did a lot of conferences together, and they seem like they're all in different fields, biologists, neurologists. Daniel Bennett is a philosopher. And their mind is, his argument is, well, we don't need to explain the universe because the universe causes itself. Now, coming from a brilliant mind, you wonder, how is that possible? Like, if you understand the concept that nothing can cause itself unless it already exists, then how can you say that besides the fact that you're trying to make a point? You remember that quote from Richard Wanton? We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Remember that? So when you read that article, what's interesting, what the point that Richard Wanton is making is, even if our scientific theories are counterintuitive, we have to stick with it because we're committed to materialism. If I believe in a philosophy in which it says that there is no God, and if any scientific theories point toward God, I have to reject them because of my commitment to materialism. That is the point that I think Daniel Bennett is making without even noticing. If you say the universe cannot cause itself because it would have to be outside of itself at the same time of being itself, which is impossible, and then when you read that, you realize, okay, man, he's one of those guys who's committed to his atheism, and the point he's making is really is not a point, because the universe cannot cause itself. So look at your paper, and then we'll take a break. So you have a simple form of the cosmological argument. Now you have like a more elaborate one, if you want to say this way. There's 4 points instead of 3. So the universe and contingent beings exist. And that's the point, because think about this way. If everything exists needs a cause, what do you think people will argue against Christians? If you're an atheist, what would you say? If I come to you, everything that exists or began to exist has a cause. What would you say to me?
How can you prove it?
Well, we already proved in the video. There's another question or something you could ask me.
Would cause God?
Yes, where does God come from, right? So this way of formulating is different, right? So that says the universe and contingent beings, meaning any beings or life forms that is contingent or dependent on the existence of the universe in that way exists, right? So that's the first part. We know the universe exists. Number 2, all dependent beings or contingent beings must have a cause or explanation for their dependent existence, right? That's the premise number 1 here. An infinite regress of existentially dependent causes are impossible. Therefore, there must be a first uncaused cause for the universe and for its dependent beings, right? The key sentence here is uncaused cause. Because one thing that follows logically, if the universe had a beginning, it has to have a cause. But if that cause was not itself uncaused, that means that cause itself would need its own cause, right? And if every cause needed, or any effect needed a cause, where would we go? Back in time to infinity again. And that wouldn't be possible. At some point, it's what we call the principle of causality. At some point, there has to be a first uncaused cause. It's a philosophical principle. It's not a Christian principle. It's a philosophical principle, right? So what we're saying here is the universe exists, right? It did have a beginning, and it needs a cause. And that cause has to be outside the universe, so transcendent. It has to be powerful. Look at it. It has to be intelligent. Look at how organized and complex it is. And it has to be spaceless, because space came with the universe. It has to be timeless. So every attribute we know from God, He's infinite, He's eternal, He's immaterial, He's a spirit. All these attributes we know from God in the Bible are actually compliant with the argument itself. That's how we would argue for this, okay? So let's take a 10-minute pause. We'll come back, review it, and then we'll go to the second argument, all right? See you guys in a few minutes. Okay, let's close the door. Let's wrap this up. Where's everybody? Taking a break? All right, let's find our seats and we can carry on. All right, so I realize that this is a bit challenging in one way. I told you to brace for impact. Apparently, none of you had your seatbelts on, because now you have a concussion. So let's try again. All right, so what do we have? We don't have vegetables. It's even the Bible is falling down. Oh no. It's ruined. The whole class is ruined. Okay. All right. So again, okay. We'll see. Maybe I have to slow down and reorganize the class a tiny bit. But let me say this: when we're arguing, I think the bottom line really that changes everything is does God exist or not, right? And as Francis Schaeffer, the Christian philosopher, used to say, this is the most important question of anyone, because if God does exist and everything is true, then heaven and hell are true. Christ died on the cross is true, and if God does not exist, nothing matters. So that is the most important question. So when we argue, we have to argue both ways. Show that God does exist, these are the arguments. And number two, that God is necessary for explaining the world the way it is. All the things we enjoy as human beings, the objective truth, the reliability of our thinking, all the things, they need explanation. So when we argue for God's existence, we're arguing with these arguments. So the first and bottom line in any form of arguments is that since we're here, we have to explain why we're here. The universe does exist, we know that. And we also know nothing can cause itself into existence, contrary to Daniel Bennett and his thinking. So we know that for a fact. Experiencers, and one of the arguments they made in the video, remember, if things would just come out of nowhere, we would have noticed by now, right? And our experience and our scientific experience shows us that nothing can come by itself to existence. So, that's a general principle. Nothing can come to existence by itself. So everything that is here or begin to exist has a cause. This is really undisputed. We know that for a fact. Everything we see around us, everything we know has a cause. We understand that. Now the second one is, we could ask this as a question, did the universe begin to exist, or is the universe eternal? Because if the universe did begin to exist, what does that mean?
Who started it?
Yes, it must have a cause itself. That's where the argument wins or loses in premise number two, right? Premise number one, can we dispute this one? We can't. Premise number two is the one that is disputed. How did we show that premise number two was correct? How did we do that? There was a philosophical argument and the scientific argument. Do you recall them? What is the philosophical and what is the scientific argument for premise number two, that the universe did have a beginning? How did we argue for it? Yes, sir. Which argument are you choosing, philosophical or scientific?
Scientific.
Okay, go ahead.
We are running slowly out of energy.
Usable energy, yes. And what does that mean? If we are using slowly out of usable energy, how is that an argument for a universe having a beginning? Because people may not, just like it's hard for you to relate to these new concepts, you can actually understand why it could be hard for other people. So I need to be able to explain why. Okay, we're running out of usable energy. I get that. How does that show the universe has a beginning? Tell me.
Because if we are using it up, it means that time is passing.
Yes. But more than that. Yes.
It will have an end.
Yes, it would have an end. But why? Tell me why. Give me an example. Let's put it this way. All right, let me rephrase that. Let's say you guys are Christians and I'm the atheist. I'm giving a conference. I'm telling you why I believe that the universe was always here. As Bertrand Russell brilliantly defended, just because. Right? That's a very strong argument. Did I make a strong argument? Now you want to counter-argue with me, and you need to explain to me why you believe the universe did have a beginning. And someone in the class said, because we're running out of usable energy. I don't understand what you're saying. Tell me why. How is that? Give me an example that shows the principle you're telling me. Because I'm aware of the second law of thermodynamics. Most of the scientists who are atheists also know about the principle. They just don't see the connection between that law and the actual meaning that the universe had a beginning. Yes, sir?
So if there's no beginning and it's eternal, it would have run out of energy by now.
It would have, yes. But what did I tell you? Well, we haven't reached that point yet. How are you telling me? Because maybe we haven't reached the point of so we know it's running out, but maybe it hasn't run out yet. At some point, at some point in time, it would run out. But why is that illogical? Because I'm arguing against you. I'm telling you, but maybe it hasn't run out of energy yet. How would you answer that? Right now, I'm winning the argument. Not good. Yes. Okay?
That a car didn't just appear, and if you have a car, you have to put gas in it.
Yes?
So with the gas running out, you used to put more gas in it. So
Yes.
I'm not sure where we're going with it, but that was the example that you gave.
Yes.
I don't remember how you related to that.
Right. So let's think about this way. Let's look at the universe as a gas tank. It has an amount of usable energy, right? Think about this with your car and your tank. Think about the implications that it has. Okay? Stop for a moment and think. The universe, let's reduce the universe as a gas tank with a usable energy. We know that we're running low. Okay? What does that mean? What are the implications? When you are driving your car and it goes down to E, what does that mean?
I have to refill it.
Yes, it means that you have to refill it. What else does it mean?
The reservoir is empty.
Well, yes, coming to an end, but what does that mean?
It means it had to have a beginning.
Yes, at some point you filled it up, right? Otherwise, if it wasn't running out, then you would never know you're running out. If your car had a unlimited gas tank, would you ever run out? Right, but if you do run out, you're running out. Why is that a proof that your gas tank is not infinite? Because it's running out. That's the very argument. The very idea that it is running out is a proof that it couldn't be eternal because it's running out. If it was infinite, two things would have happened if it was infinite. Number one, we would already have run out of energy in infinite past, because it's way down there. And if we still do, right, that does mean, right, like if we're running out, that it had a limited amount at some point. You only run out of things for which you have a limited amount of. You cannot run out of things that are infinite. It's impossible. You can only run out of things for which you have a limited amount. If I spend money in my accounts, it would be limited. Everything that I run out of is always a limited amount. Now, if people might argue, well, maybe the universe will refill itself. Okay, but how? Go back to the idea that the universe cannot be eternal and it also cannot have caused itself. If the universe would refill itself, I mean somebody else is outside the car refilling the gas. Because if the universe is the car, does the gas station belong to the universe? It doesn't. The gas station is outside the car. So if the universe was refueling the car, that would mean in that way that somebody else would be outside the universe refilling the universe. It doesn't make any sense. Every time, and you'll find this interesting, every time ones argue for the self-sustenance of the universe, they always argue for the existence of God. Remember when we discussed the issues we have with evolution? One of the issues I have with evolution is that evolution requires a lot of intelligence and planning and engineering for it to succeed. Every time evolution tries some things, it succeeds. Every single time. But if it's true, that means that for evolution to be successful, it has to require an outside intelligence behind it. I'm not saying it's true. What I'm saying is you cannot argue against God using evolution. You're actually arguing for his existence. Because evolution requires a form of intelligent action. Right? You remember the example we gave, right? before the eye existed, the capacity to see outside, there has to be some plan of thinking, number one, that eyesight is better than no eyesight. Who decides that if there is no one behind the evolution? And then once I decided that having an eyesight is better than not having an eyesight, I need to plan and prepare for the transformation of some species so they can actually be equipped with something that will work to see out there. The R&D, I don't know if you know what R&D is in a company, it's research and development. The R&D is crazy on this one. Somebody has to realize, okay, somebody needs to see. The concepts of seeing is something brand new, never existed before. And that's a very complicated concept. And from this, I'm going to start working on this. What could be so intricately designed so it can equip some living species for them to be able to see? We need to come up with a material that will work. We're not talking about screwing two pieces together. We are thinking about a concept that is having an eye, two eyes actually, and all the components of the eyes, and then the connection to the brain with the optical nerves. This is amazing. So that's the point. Every time people argue against the existence of God, and they are using an argument, they're actually showing that none of this would be possible if there was no intelligence behind it. The universe couldn't call itself, therefore there has to have a creator, right? That's the idea of the cosmological argument. So far, so good?
Yes.
Right, so that was the scientific reason why we believe the universe had a beginning. What is the philosophical reason why we believe that the universe had a beginning? Yes?
Nothing can cause itself.
Yes. Yes. It's a philosophical reason why we believe the universe had a beginning, but the point is, we also, in a way, that answers the question that implies the fact that we already believe in it, because then the better when he says it caused itself, he's implying the universe did have a beginning. So he's not arguing against that, right? When you argue that the universe caused itself, you actually agree with the Christians who tell you the universe had a beginning, right? So that's a different argument. So what's the philosophical argument that shows that we use to argue and say that the universe had a beginning philosophically?
Infinity can't actually exist.
Yes. How do we know that? Yes, it's in mathematics it doesn't work because the math, actual infinity minus actual infinity equals actual infinity, and sometimes actual infinity minus actual infinity equals how many? 3. Doesn't make any sense. The math doesn't compute. So the actual number infinity does not actually work. What's the other example they gave in the video? Yes. Infinite number of rotations or revolutions around the sun end up being the same, but one planet actually goes around the sun twice as many times as the other planets, but they would end up having the same number, which doesn't make any sense, right? And what's the last example they gave?
Dominoes.
Yes. Uh-oh. Let's try the dominoes again. All right. Somebody can explain to me the dominoes. How is that an argument? If you were to give me an example with the dominoes, how would you word it?
Dominoes today, we would never reach it because of the infinite amount of falling happening before this moment today.
Yes.
So it's not possible that we would ever reach today, but we do reach today.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Now let's take that, which is and try to explain for someone who does not understand what we're talking about. Give me a full developed example of dominoes, because you have to explain how dominoes work with sequences of time. So that is the one thing I want you to understand. I know it's hard, but we got to do this. All right, I'm going to try it one more time. Yes. Tell me more.
So, for those dominoes to fall, there needed to be a cause initially.
Yes.
And now everything, because of the cause affecting, everything's fallen with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So if today was the last domino, it's very good. If today was the last domino, I'm arguing that today's domino would never have fallen. Why am I arguing this? If the universe was eternal, why could today's domino would never have been reached by the previous dominoes?
It will be going and ongoing all the time.
Yes.
It never reaches that point.
Okay. And we're getting pieces over there, but I'm trying to have a collection of... All of this is very good, except you have to be able to use the argument, you have to understand the concept, and you have to be able to defend it, of course. So remember, this is upper level class, okay? So I cannot just dumb it down too much. I know I'm being a little bit, forceful, but it's for your own good.
Well, so the idea is that there's an infinite amount of dominoes between today
Yes.
and the cause.
Yes.
So if you start the cause when it starts, you could never reach today.
Yes.
An infinite amount.
Okay, we're getting there. Very good, very good. Okay.
And there's no way you could have an infinite amount without there being a beginning to start the domino effect.
Yes.
So you could never even start the dominoes in the first place, right?
Yes, because if there's an infinite number of dominoes, that means you're going back in time trying to find where's the first domino so I can push them down. When would you get to the first domino?
Never.
Thank you. We're getting there, okay? So you getting it now, slowly? All right. Let's, one more time. Let's start from scratch. Talk to me. I love dominoes.
It's going to come to an end. The energy is going to come to an end. So because there's a beginning and there's an end, it's not infinite.
Yes, that's the scientific argument. Very good. But how do we apply that to the... Yes, simply put, this is very good. Now, give me someone try to give me a full thought, explain that you're talking to me and I'm arguing that the universe did not have a beginning, and now you explain to me that the universe had to have a beginning with dominoes. Not the pizza place, because that is not a good example. Dominoes, no, but the dominoes. Come on. I won't let you go anywhere. We're finishing this class tonight, whether it's midnight or not. Come on. But you understand how that's important, right? If in apologetic we cannot use arguments for the existence of God, we can really have a conversation about it. When people ask you, how do you know that God exists? You can say, well, because I feel it. That doesn't mean anything to any people in that way. So we have to relate on a level that we actually bring people in thinking that it's not just an emotional idea. It is not actually. It's a sensible, intelligent idea. If God created us and gave us a brain, we can think, and he wants to reason in that way. So God being infinitely more intelligent than we are, he's giving us clues. And one of those is, guys, the universe did have a beginning. And when people argue who it didn't, you have to be able to explain that to them, right? So we know about the scientifically second law of thermodynamics. We know if we do run out of energy, that means we had a fixed amount of it at some point, and therefore, if the universe was eternal, then there wouldn't be any fixed amount of energy. It would have been as the universe would have been infinite, then the amount of usable energy would be infinite as well. It's not the case, therefore the universe is not infinite. That's one argument. The other argument is with time. So we are slowly taking this idea of times, these special events and moments, and we're comparing them with dominoes. Each domino is a moment in time, right? Now, if the universe was eternal, how many dominoes would we have? Infinite number. Okay, so let's start the first domino. How do I get to the first domino? You can't, so can I stop the sequence? Let's say miraculously the first domino falls itself on the ground. Okay, it's falling. How many dominoes do we have? I'm here in 2024. The universe is all the way back in there. The first domino started. There's an infinite number between there and here. When does these dominoes will reach me? Yeah. Thank you. So could the universe be eternal? No, because there wouldn't be a today. You get that?
Yes, sir.
That was my one more explanation. Now you're going to give it back to me in full length.
Well, it's just like saying, an entropy where everything falls apart. That's an end.
That's
So-
not the dominoes. I want the dominoes. But you're right. You're giving me the argument with the scientific. You're completely right about that. And I think we got it. We got the scientific explanations. You said it very simply. Very good. I want the philosophical explanation with the dominoes.
If the dominoes start, and if they start, they still can't stop.
They can't stop. Tell me more.
They're gonna stop. Because it's the beginning.
Okay.
Not the end.
All right.
Until God makes new heaven, new earth.
All right. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask 5 of you to try to get easier. Okay? All right. Ben, you're first. Because I have to force you. I need to get to the bottom of this.
So if time would be eternal,
Yes.
or world would,
Let's use the word infinite more than eternal.
yeah, infinite,
Yes.
and you lay up dominoes, and one of the dominoes in this point would be present time.
Yes.
If you try to trace from the present time to the as many dominoes as possible, infinite amount of dominoes back, you cannot reach to the beginning.
Yes.
And so, but if you take it other way around, you suddenly, what you just mentioned, suddenly the first falls down. To reach this point, infinite amount needs to fall down.
Yes.
And if that infinite amount falls down, it will take infinite amount of time to fall down. So there is not going to be possibility for present time.
Yes. You see, if you want to do it, you can do it. All right. Who else? Am I pointing fingers? Ben did a good job. Because you want to do it?
Everything has to stop to come to the present, you're saying? Everything else comes to stop to have the present day?
No, everything was to fall down.
He did everything for all of us. But
No, he didn't. But the point is, you see, it's not that complicated. It's just like I think you're afraid of making a mistake. But if you want to use that argument, you have to learn how to use it. I'm sure you want to try it. I can see it in your eyes.
Okay.
All right.
All right, so if you believe that the universe always existed,
Yes.
that means that it's been around for infinity.
Yes.
So,
So far, so good.
if I take an infinite amount of dominoes and they are set up somewhere,
And each domino representing a moment in time.
yeah,
Yes.
and somehow one of them starts falling. And do we both agree that we are living in 2024?
Yes, we do.
So when would that infinite amount of dominoes reach 2024?
Theoretically, never.
But we're in 2024.
Yes, and I would see your point. That would automatically means that for us to have reached to this domino, that there wasn't an infinite amount of dominoes. Therefore, there couldn't be an infinite amount of time. Therefore, universe couldn't be eternal. Very simple. You see?
yes.
So 2 out of 2. I'm gonna stop there because nobody wants to volunteer. She's like, yeah. Are you volunteering? All right. So really, the point being is, I think what we have to understand when we talk about the cosmological argument is, if you want to simplify, and I really can't do that in an upper level class, but I want to do it anyway, just for the sake of the conversation. one thing that I do tell students sometimes, is you can always send people back to their homework also, right? So, for example, you can argue. You can use the arguments without completely mastering the answer to premise number 2. But you have to understand the 2 premises, and you have to lead people to the conclusion. Everything that exists had a beginning. The universe does exist, and it had a beginning, because it's one of those things that does exist, regardless of what people think. And therefore, the universe had a beginning, and therefore, he had a cause. Very simple. And if people argue in that way, well, you can say we know that philosophically and scientifically, right? And you can use whichever of the 2 you feel more comfortable with. But if the universe had a beginning, it cannot be itself, because nothing that does not exist can cause itself to existence, right? And one way to simply say that is asking someone who's talking to you, did you call yourself to existence? Did you decide, instead of your parents, did you decide to be born? You didn't. Could you have been able to decide for your existence? No, of course not. Same thing with anything that does not exist. If the universe didn't exist, it couldn't cause itself. See? So there's a simple way to say that, but most of the time, when you find people that really want to fight with you in the conversations, they would want to argue, and then that's why you have to know what these arguments are. Okay? All right, so let's go to the teleological argument. Can we have the video? Thank you. Video we saw a few weeks ago. So this is a simpler form, right? from the previous video, and this one just adds a little bit on the other fine-tuning. So what's the concept of fine-tuning? Is realizing that the universe is very well designed, right? Designed in the sense that it's not only designed to create life, but to be able to sustain also complex life. We are one of those examples of complex life, right? The way we are, the way we operate, everything is complex, but far beyond the idea of being complex ourselves is the fact the universe capable of allowing and actually fostering, one of the words you don't like, because it's an inside joke, enabling a universe where life is possible requires a lot of fine, small things that have to be perfectly in order. I don't know if you guys are bakers or cooks or anything, but there's one thing I find out when we do baking, is that when you taste the product at the end, it's not the same if you forgot an ingredient. It does not. It's not the same, right? You forgot salt, you forgot sugar, whatever that is. And if you have the wrong amount, so nobody does a cake without following a recipe. Otherwise, it's a disaster. And when you look at the universe, for the universe to be able to function the way it is and allow life and allow complex life, it had to be perfectly fine-tuned. So they give you some of those example over there, the gravity and some things you remember from the video, the distance from the sun, the size of the moon, the axis, of the earth and all the seasons and all these things. The way we know the life the way we know it couldn't be what it is if it wasn't fine-tuned. And fine-tuning is another word for design, right? So I'm going to direct you to the paper that you have, part 2. Under cosmological argument, you have that, right? It says teleological argument from design. You get that? You have that in front of you? Let's read that. Okay, premise number 1. The universe manifests evidence of design. Does it? Does the universe manifest evidence of design? It does, right? Premise number 2, all designs demands a designer. That's also a good premise. So on this argument, it's not the second premise who will be disputed, it's the first one, right? We'll discuss, because no, the universe is not designed. Therefore, the universe must have a designer. That is, in a sense, the teleological argument, very simply. So, and I think this, to be helpful, to argue the most disputed of the two premises would be the first one. Okay, in the cosmological argument, it's the second one. On the teleological argument, it's the first premise. People say, well, we don't have any proof of design in this universe. And we have to show some of the things. We have to know, maybe by heart, some of the arguments we heard from the Privileged Planet or this short video. Because all the videos we're watching, they are in College Office. So you have access to all of those. And you can realize that some things, the life as we know it, couldn't be possible without these constants that have to be perfectly aligned with each other. So one of the examples they gave, they have the slots machines, in casinos, let's say, and then to get, what are the chances you get 3? Have you ever seen the slots? They have 3, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5. What are the chances of me getting those 5 the same? Slim, right? But the more I add, I'm going to put it this way. I'm going to do a little math with you because it's 10 o'clock, it's not very late. Let's do some math. Everybody loves math, right? Who doesn't love math? Now, if I have 1 or 2 chances here, okay, and for me to be able to, I'm going to do this. And for example, look at all these things, and for me to win, I don't have to have the same thing, but I have to have things in order, right? So on the first, I'm in front of my machine, I'm in Vegas, right? And for me to win, I need to have letters in order, the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. That's what I need, in order. So, and they are, of course, in that first one here, behind the machine, there are 26 sides to the cylinder, right? 1 for every letter, correct? What are my chances of getting an A? Anybody knows the odds? 1 out of 26, correct? We did that. Now, I get an A. Did I win? No. I didn't win. But do I get still a chance to win? Yes, thank you. Now, I'm running the machine again. I need a B on the second one. What are my chances of getting a B? 1 out of 26. Now look at that, how lucky I am. Because I get A, B. Did I win? But am I still capable of winning? Yes, of course I am. So now I get a C, right? How many chances do I have to get a C? So might think it's pretty simple because I can get, the fine tuning is the idea. We got all the letters in right order and I get them every time. Now, one chance out of 26, is that a difficult odd? Not really, If I keep throwing the dice or keep running the machine, will I get an A eventually? I will. Now, will I get a B eventually? But will I get a B after an A, and then a C, and then a D every time I roll the machine? The odds are 1 out of 26 times 26 times 26 for every single letter. So it's not 3 chances, it's 1 out of 26 times 26 times 26. Now the numbers are becoming less and less likely. So if I have 1 letter to get, I have 1 out of 26 chances. If I have 2 letters to get, it's 1 out of 26 times 26 chances. My odds are getting lower and lower and lower. So the more variables you have, the more unlikely it is that you will get everything right. Did the universe get everything right for complex life? It did. Isn't that a show of design? So if, and we go back to the argument, right? The universe manifests evidence of design. We just showed that. The odds of this being by chance is impossible. And all design demands a designer, therefore the universe must have a designer. And that designer, we already discussed it earlier with the cosmological arguments, right? What did we say? It has to be outside the universe. Now we're adding this, it has to be pretty intelligent to come up with all these constants that are actually making life possible. Okay? Do we have any questions? So we covered 2 arguments out of 4. Do we have any questions so far?
I have a curiosity question.
Yes.
So if I was arguing with one of these guys in the class or with you, and I give this argument, okay, it's 2024 right now, so that proves that the universe comes to a stop, and you're saying it's infinitive, and they say, well, it could be a rolling thing, and we're in the year 2024, but it continues to roll. Well, what do you say to that?
Well, to reach any point in time, it would have to mean that you're capable of reaching that point. Now, if I'm telling you, get your motorcycle and go to Vegas, can you accomplish that? Okay. Now, I want you to go to Vegas, right? But we just discovered that from here to Vegas, there is an unlimited, infinite number of miles. Will you be able to get to Vegas? So the only reason why you can get to Vegas, because I'm Vegas because of the slot machine. You got to be coherent in the class tonight. It's because there is a limited amount. So every time we're capable of finishing something, arriving somewhere, is because there is no unlimited amount of anything.
You arrived here, so
Yes. So if we arrive to today, that means there is no unlimited amount of times that preceded us. The universe couldn't be eternal.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments?
I've arrived.
Yes, well, yeah, apparently you did. All right, okay, we're good? So come back next time, but when I tell you brace for impact, come on, brace for impact, okay? Next week, it won't be more difficult, but it won't be easier either. All right, see you guys next week.